This Shabbat rests between two powerful days of Jewish memory. This past Monday, Yom HaShoah, we remembered the brutal genocide against our people that resulted in the murder of 6 million Jews. And this coming Monday, we will mark Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terror, this year adding more than 1,500 names to the memorial list. As Jews, we observe these days as ones of Jewish remembrance, not Jewish history. Because despite what you might have learned, we Jews don't have a history. We have memory. What do I mean by this? The verb remember, zachor, appears 169 times in our Torah. Remember this day when you went free from Egypt. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey out of Egypt. By contrast, how many times do you think the word history appears in the Torah? 0. When modern Hebrew was revived in the land of Israel, they had to devise a word for history because it didn't exist. It's historia. When the Torah references something of the past, it's a zechira, a remembrance, which is something quite different than history. You see, history is someone else's story. It happened to them. History exists in a book on a shelf even after the protagonists are gone. But memory is our story. It happened to us. And memory cannot exist without rememberers. Every Jew is a memory keeper. Last month, we observed one of the greatest memory-keeping exercises the Jews have, the Passover Seder. And if you recall, we do not tell the story of Exodus as ancient history. Instead, b'chol dor vador, in every generation, we are commanded to remember that we personally were slaves in Egypt. We taste our tears. We build sandwiches of mortar and maror and ingest our affliction. And the weight of that personal memory, from enslavement to redemption, demands something of us. But not every Jew has interpreted that command in the same way. I remember a powerful conversation that our former president, Abby Pogrebin, shared in an article for The Atlantic, Passover, 2 years ago. Back then, she was hosting a podcast with Rabbi Dov Linzer, an Orthodox rabbi, and she told him that at her Passover Seder, childhood Seders, the primary command of her family's Jewish memory of enslavement was compassion. Her Seders emphasized the verse, "You shall not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." Rabbi Linzer, surprised, said that Exodus verse does not even appear in his traditional Haggadah. Instead, at his childhood Seders, his memory of our enslavement demanded our vigilance and resilience, summed up in the verse, "In every generation, our enemies rise up against us to destroy us, but God delivers us out of their hands." This contrasting demand stemming from our Jewish memory can also be found in the Jewish response to the Holocaust. For some, our rallying cry, "Never again," commanded the universal call for all oppressed people everywhere, for we were once those people. For others, "Never again" calls for the primacy of self-defense and protection for the Jewish people, for in every generation, we continue to be the targets of a particularly pernicious hatred. Menachem Begin was the first prime minister of Israel who lost close, immediate family members in the Holocaust. The Nazis murdered his father, mother, brother, and many other relatives. He instituted the practice of bringing every foreign leader who visited Israel to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum. And this memory deeply informed his leadership. In 1981, believing that Israel was under imminent threat, he ordered a surprise attack against Osirak, which was a nuclear reactor in Iraq. He famously stated that the first lesson from the Holocaust was, if an enemy of our people says he seeks to destroy us, believe them. For Begin, the fear of another Holocaust was real, and he acted upon the command, never again. But Begin also understood that never again was not just about Jews. In 1977, in Begin's very first act as prime minister, he welcomed a large group of Vietnamese refugees who the world called boat people, making Israel one of the very first nations to grant them asylum. He oversaw the immigration of 360 Vietnamese refugees and urged other nations to do the same, powerfully saying, quote, "We have learned from the history of Jewish ships that wandered the seven seas seeking shelter only to be refused. We will never forget the ship that left Germany before the Second World War broke out. No other country wanted them either. Many of them brought back to the gas chambers. We, as a country of Jews, will not tolerate injustices done by humanity in the past. Therefore, we will give sanctuary to these refugees who choose freedom." Now, for students of Israel, Menachem Begin might not be the leader you would select as your first role model, but the Holocaust was not just history for him. It was a memory seared into his kishkas, and it demanded a response, both to remember all people and to protect our own. I will be honest, it's hard to recreate that physicalized, true sense of memory of our Exodus with a Passover Seder, even if gefilte fish is a food of oppression. For most Jews alive today, our enslavement in Egypt, the expulsion from Spain, the pogroms in Europe, even the Holocaust, they feel like distant history. But October 7th, that was branded into our souls as Jewish memory. We personally experienced it. We ached and raged, worried and wept. This memory has ignited an emotion and an urgency that has surprised us. For months after this shared trauma, our congregation and the wider Jewish community felt united in our grief, in our purpose. But as the war continues, as hostages remain in captivity, as humanitarian aid is intercepted, as rockets rain down from Iran and Lebanon, as an operation in Rafah begins, as campus protests here wreak havoc, as anti-Semitic speech becomes increasingly normalized and tolerated, our community, both here and in Israel, is fracturing over the response to it all. It has gotten so bad that the dialogue on a large Jewish listserv I'm on that is usually so full of thoughtful debate has devolved into hurled insults of schmuck and capo and worse for their fellow Jews. Now, putting aside the most extreme and dangerous elements from each side, the vast majority of Jews who are currently fighting each other, sometimes generations within the same families, these are ethical and righteous Jews struggling with what their Jewish memory demands of them. Is it first and foremost to remember the other or to protect our family? Most people tend to privilege one of those over the other. But the answer is both. It has to be both. We are now the Jewish memory keepers of October 7th and its aftermath, and this story has not yet been fully written. And what will that memory demand of each one of us? Zachor, remember. Do not forget what Hamas, Iran, and the other enemies of our people did and will continue to do. When Hamas says in its charter that it will exterminate Israel and Jews, when it promises more October 7ths on Israel, believe them. Do not be naive. There is no moral currency in perpetual victimhood. We have a moral responsibility to protect our people. Never again. And Zachor, remember, we were the stranger, and the Palestinian people have a right to self-determination in their land. Hamas is surely one of their greatest impediments for freedom and safety, but Israel cannot be redeemed until both peoples on that land live in security and freedom, and we must do everything in our power to bring about that day. I know it feels impossible, but we have seen time and again the impossible made real. Because our story is not just one of enslavement, but also our very unlikely freedom. We have tasted the bitterness and the tears, but we have also tasted rebirth and redemption. That too is in our memory. Never again. Our Jewish memory demands this for us and for everyone.